indeed. I can't say how privileged both Ali and I feel to be here with you today. And what an amazing gathering of coaches to pull you together for that reflection, for that time together, and for that sharing. So we hope what we've got to share with you this morning is useful, that it gets you to reflect and think. Some of what we have to say to you will undoubtedly simply affirm what you already know and do. But hopefully somewhere in there might be something that gives you that moment of reflection that'll help you move on. So, whoops, we've gone too far already. Let's try again. That's it. Just in case you wonder who I am, the older one, that's her, no, me, I'm Sue, and Ali will follow me in a moment. We both work now at an organisation called the Youth Sport Trust. Our focus is very much on young people and on their journey through sport, both as participants and performers, but also some that come and touch sport, are involved in sport, don't stay in it, but through that experience are better in life. So for us, coaching is not just about performance. It's not even just about participation. It's about how are we ensuring every young person that we touch on that journey is better for that experience, whether they stay with us in our sport or not. And we're very passionate about that, both of us. We both have coached, and we're both very committed to coaching, just as we are to teaching. And we believe that coaching and teaching sit at the heart of an experience that can change a child's life. Not just in sporting terms, but in much bigger terms. So I guess one of my first challenges to you is, when you have young people in your hands, whatever level of sport you're working at, are you really thinking about what is best for them in life as well as in sport? One other thing I want to say right at the beginning is that for me, coaching has 4 very distinct strands to it. There's the technical, tactical, strategical stuff that we all know it's our bread and butter. How do we do this sport? Over the years, over the last 30 years, we've got more and more science, really beginning to unpick not just what we're doing, but why we're doing it. Physiology, psychology, nutrition, masses of knowledge that we can draw on and use. There's a third strand, though, which is about how we teach. Big word, pedagogy, but that's the one I'm going to use. But it's about how we teach, the methods with which we teach, how we communicate, how we organize, how we plan. And finally, there's this very, very special and very difficult thing to understand called the art of coaching. So I have an expression which says that good coaches coach sport, great coaches, and you saw one yesterday on the stage, great coaches coach people. And that art form, that ability to connect with people and to get them to perform in a way that they couldn't do on their own, to lift them, to energize them, to give them that focus, that intensity, that purpose, that's what great coaches do. They can't play the game for the athlete, but they can get the athlete ready. And they can get the athlete ready in a way that perhaps alone they couldn't have done. And that is the brilliance of coaching. So Ali and I are going to focus on these 3 things, which is very much to do with the pedagogy, the teaching, and the art form. We're not going to try and touch the technical, tactical, strategical, or indeed the science. But we are going to hopefully challenge you around those other 2 aspects. And we're going to do it in 3 sections. We're going to talk about what is athlete-centered coaching. And if we go back to the first thing I said, if we're really going to change lives, the athlete must sit at the center of every decision we make. For 10 years, I was the chair of UK Sport, responsible for our high-performance system between 2003 and 2013 through the Beijing and London Olympics and Paralympics. And there are many things we did to lift the high-performance system. But the one that I will absolutely put my money on that made a defining difference was helping our coaches be athlete-centered. Not telling, but enabling, empowering, the wind beneath their wings. And that's what coaches are, you know. You give them roots to grow, and you put wind beneath their wings, and you have to let them fly. You can't tell them sometimes how to fly and where to fly. You've got to release them. So we're going to talk about what is athlete-centered coaching, what does it look like? Ali's then we're going to give you a moment or two to reflect on that. Ali's going to come on and talk particularly about coaching young people and young people as coaches. And she's going to give you time to reflect. And then I'm going to finish off and talk about what does athlete-centered coaching look like as you begin to go up that pathway of performance through talent and into the elite end. So you all know that. I don't think none of that should be a mystery. How do you begin to understand your athlete? Well, they come to us in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, with all sorts of different ambitions, motivations, capabilities. We know a lot about that issue on the right there, the age and stage of development. We know we have to adapt the game, change the nature of it, change the nature of the equipment, and as the athlete gets older, we progress the activity. Similarly with talent and elite sport, the nature of the training, the commitment expected, the hours of endeavour, the dealing with those setbacks, we know all those ages and stages. We're very familiar with those as coaches. We think we're familiar with the other things, motivation, ambition, and capability. But I wonder if we are. And I wonder if in the course of one season alone, a child's motivation changes. Their ambition changes. There is another distraction in their life. How do you monitor that? How do you know that's happening? How are you feeling the pulse of that athlete? So I would suggest to you that if we are going to put athletes at the center of our decision-making, we can't assume that when they arrive and we think they're highly motivated, very ambitious, that 6 weeks later they're the same. They may not be. And that kid that dawdles in, doesn't look particularly bothered about anything in particular, 6 weeks later might be the most ambitious, motivated kid in your group. You have that impact. You need to measure your impact on those young people. You need to constantly have a dialogue with your athletes. We had a very successful sport in Britain that had never asked the athletes what they thought of the training program. It was really successful for men. But the women's team weren't doing quite so well. And when they opened up the dialogue, they realized that the coaching methods being applied didn't work for those women. It is now one of the most successful women's sports in our country. Some of you might have guessed who it is. But the reality was that the coaches were not clued in to the athletes. They weren't connected. They were doing what they'd always done, which was a very male style of coaching. And it really worked for the guys. They were doing brilliantly. So they just took it over here and did the same thing with the women. It didn't work. So how do you connect with your athletes? And one of the things we know about all athletes at every stage of that continuum, from the beginning to the top, there are some things that motivate them to keep going. It can be ambition. Of course it can. But on a daily basis, these are the kinds of things that motivate our young people and our talented people and our elite athletes. And I'm only going to pick out a couple. Fun and excitement. Just reflect on your sessions. Are they fun? And I'm talking here even if you're dealing with the most elite, demanding athlete or that kid that's come for the first time. Are your sessions fun? And are they exciting? Or are we doing the same practice we did last week and the week before and the week before? And are we doing drills and drills and drills? Or are we finding new and creative ways to get the same skills, but it's fun, it's exciting, it's different, it's asking more of me? And the other one I'll ask about is sense of accomplishment. You know as great coaches that one of the most motivating things for anybody at any level is to say, well done. Because you are their heroes and heroines. They do look up to you. That one word, that tap on the shoulder, that smile and wink as they walk out, those things matter. But not just to one kid or two, but to every kid that comes through your hands. Every session, a child needs to leave feeling they've achieved something. An elite athlete needs to come. And it might be, just like we heard in just now, we might be that we reflect, and actually we've had not a great session, but it's still an accomplishment. It's still a step forward if we use it effectively. So how well are we doing those things? And if you know your athletes really well, I bet you think you know yourself incredibly well. Do you? Do you know what motivates you? Why are you doing this? Those of you who are volunteers, you're giving back, you love sport, it's passion. Those of you working with talented and elite athletes, perhaps now in paid employment as a coach, why are you doing this? Because it's a job? I don't think so. I think we're in coaching because we believe we can make a difference to young people's lives. That's why I'm in this business I'm in. I'm not bothered about what I'm paid and what I'm called, and I've got fancy titles and a whole host of things. But it doesn't bother me in the start. That's not why I'm here. That's not why I care. I want to make a difference every day to some young person's life. Now, if that's your purpose, what happens when you get those pressures on the other side there? So let me give you a couple of scenarios. You've one match to go. If you win it, if your athlete wins it, you're going to win the league. Your star player's slightly injured. Do you play them or not? Do you risk them? Who are you risking? You're not risking yourself, believe me. You're risking your athlete. How do you respond to that kind of pressure? Do you give in to that pressure? Or do you hold that pressure away and say, the athlete is more important than anything else? And I know I'm asking a really big amount of those of you who are in professional sport who live and die by win-loss records. But athletes must be paramount. What happens when the sport that you are coaching for starts to place demands on you? No greater demand than working at a World Cup, I'm sure. And what an amazing result, and what an amazing coach. Think about the pressures that must have been on him. You heard them yesterday. How do you respond to the same kind of pressures? And releasing control to your athletes, giving them more independence, letting them have a bigger say on what kind of training we're doing today. Even sometimes maybe letting them talk through what training they want to do today. And I know we have to motivate and drive them sometimes when they're not quite as enthusiastic as we'd like them to be. But does that frighten you? Does the notion of giving away control frighten you? Or are you comfortable with that? And right at the bottom, somewhere, I hope, over the next few days, when you do this reflection that's being asked of you, you really reflect on your moral purpose. Why do you get up in the morning and do the job? And if you are really clear about that, you will be a rock of consistency on which athletes will stand, grow, flourish, and achieve brilliant things. If you move away from that for other objectives, for other purposes, for other reasons, you begin to be inconsistent. The moment you're inconsistent, athletes will falter. And if I use British cycling as an example of this, Dave Brailsford, the performance director of British Cycling, when he was managing the team, he actually got his coaches to release control to the athletes. And they all resisted, said, "Oh no, this won't work, Dave, this will never work." Well, the results have proved it more than works. So it's got to be something that you really believe in, and you have a strong moral purpose to say the athlete must be part of this process. They're not people I do things to, They're people that go on this journey alongside me. So if we're going to get athlete-centered coaching, what do the behaviors look like for the athlete? What are we trying to get the athlete to do? And what are we doing to enable the athlete to do that? So here's just a few things that you might want to reflect on. Most athletes do have commitment. Commitment to what is the question? You may see in an athlete the most talented person you've ever seen, and you think, wow, this is the one that's going to make it all the way to the top. They haven't a commitment to go to the top. It's not what they want for themselves. It's no good you having the commitment. They have to have it. They need to own responsibility for that journey. And they need to recognize that the more you give them ownership of that responsibility for managing their own journey, so they have to take real responsibility for what they're doing. So just think about those things on the left. Forget yourselves as coaches for a minute. Think of yourselves as parents, of teachers, of grandparents, of uncles and aunts. Isn't that what you want for children? Isn't that what you want children and young people to grow up and be? Isn't that what we want our elite athletes to demonstrate to our kids? Don't we want our heroes and heroines to look like that? Of course we do. So those are the traits, I believe, of an athlete-centered coaching approach. That's what you're handing away. That's what you're expecting of your athlete. And what about you? How do you do that? Well, you have to be about empowering, questioning. And I'll ask you one, just off that list, I'll ask one simple question. And that is, how good are you at asking a question? We have a course that practices asking questions. Most coaches ask a question which doesn't really have any choice in the answer. You know how to do that, don't you? Well, there isn't too many answers to that one. Do you know how to do that? Open question. So you need to be able to practice open questions, not closed ones. Not I'm the expert, I'm the person who knows best, I'm the one that's going to tell you what to do. No. How are you going to do this? And then you have to shape that. That's what coaching is. It's shaping. It's not telling, it's shaping. How good are you at shaping? So what are the obstacles, do you think, for athlete-centered coaching? For you personally, you may already be an athlete-centered coach. You may have ticked every one of those things I've said and say, that's how I coach. Or you may not. But what are the obstacles for athlete-centered coaching? Is it the athletes themselves? They come, they want to be told what to do, I hear people say. They want to be told what to do. When I first coached, I told everybody what to do. I was the most coach you've ever seen in your life. Until I met a man who reminded me, I was coaching netball, who reminded me that in netball, the netball players make decisions. And he asked me, when do they practice that then? Because you're telling them what to do all the time. And I realized, oh, I don't. And he said, well, don't blame them if they make poor decisions on the pitch. So are the athletes really wanting to be told? Or is it that's their expectation? And as you liberate them by asking questions rather than telling, do you change that dynamic between you and them? And do you change their responsibility for their own performance? I don't look to you. You know that expression? If you look to the bench, go sit on it. Okay? Because you're no good on the pitch. If you're looking to the bench for your answers, forget it, come off. I used to say to my players, you look at me, I'm having you off. Okay? You're going to sit on the bench, I'll put someone on who has a jolly good try and probably doesn't look to me, and probably hopeless as well, but it doesn't matter. So what is it that's stopping you? So we're going to stop for a second, just get you a couple of minutes now to reflect, okay? You've heard what I've said. I don't mind which bit of what I've said you discuss. Or you might want to just say to yourselves, what stops me doing this? Or what stops my sport adopting this kind of approach? We'll give you a few minutes to do that, and we'll swap over. So have a chat amongst yourselves.
Allow you to finish your sentences. It's the worst bit, isn't it? When people are flowing and they've got great stuff to talk about to stop them. So I do apologise for having to stop you, but I want to keep some momentum in the session. And as Sue said, I'm the second half of the duo. I won't say anything about age, but she did hint to that. So it's only appropriate that I take on Sue's messages and her journey that she started this morning and focus perhaps now on coaching young people. Sue's going to then come back to coaching talent and performance later, but just going to focus for a little minute on some of the things Sue's been talking about, those principles and philosophy of athlete-centered coaching, and try and bring it to life in a practical sense. That's what I'm going to try and do, and give some examples of what this might look like when we're coaching the little ones. And I've used a model as the basis for my 10 or 15 minutes, which I've called the Virtuous Circle of coaching young people. And it stretches from the start base of engaging young people and coaching young people and takes us on a journey to a point, hopefully, where we get young people as coaches. And there's two reasons I've picked the model. One is because in the UK, the Youth Sport Trust, we're finding this to be an incredibly effective model for not only engaging young people, but sustaining and retaining them in sport, which I know is a big challenge to countries all over the world. We've spent some time with a range of colleagues and practitioners here in New Zealand, and we know that that's a challenge for you, and it absolutely is at home. So it is an effective model. But secondly, the other thing that we know is what we do with children in our coaching creates what we get in the future. So for those of you that coach young people and go on sometimes to coach adults and elite performers, you reap what you sow. So what we start off with in terms of our coaching methodology will pay dividends if we get it right for young people and adults as they go on to lifelong participation or performance, or could stand in their way. If we're creating behaviours and attitudes and perceptions in young people, that will come back and bite us at some point, whether that's in adult participation where they're walking away from sport, or whether it's elite performers who perhaps lack that sense of purpose and purposeful responsibility that we need. So, if we just take stage one of the model, picking up on Sue's challenge to you today to make sure, if nothing else, you go away and think about moral purpose. If we're coaching children, that is so, so important. And I think it's important for three reasons. And three reasons are underpinned by the points on the slide. The first thing is, are we really clear what young people need when we're coaching them? Because to some degree, when we're coaching young people, while we want to grow that decision-making capability, at the youngest levels, we have to have a sense of what's important and what do they need. Then what do they want? And then finally, overlay that with how can we add value to their life. And just as Sue said at the beginning, we're in the business of developing people. Sport and coaching is our vehicle, but really we're developing people. So number one is, what do they need? They need, above everything else, physical literacy. They need a positive sense of physical identity. One of the greatest reasons that people, as participants, walk away from sport is because they don't feel comfortable doing it, or because they lack the fundamental skills and competencies that they need to feel that this is fun and enjoyable. So it doesn't matter where you are in the life course of the athlete or the participant, making sure that we're continually going back and equipping them with the fundamental skills and movements that they'll need to be able to enjoy and participate. That's what they need more than anything else. You know, don't you? You know, if you're working at the elite level and the intensity of training ramps up, sometimes physicality breaks down because we haven't developed the fundamentals in them. They've either acquired bad habits or lack some of the physical competence that they need to underpin more technical skills. Then in terms of what they want, our experience is showing us in the UK that the things that young people want most are enduring. They've never changed. And don't take this the wrong way, but what young people want is the F word. Sue's hinted at it. They want fun, but they also want freedom, and they want friendship. Hugely important. Those three F words are the determinants for young people, more often than not, that why they stay or leave sport. So one of those three disappears from it. It's either no longer fun, you're in some way not allowing them to continue to socialize with their friends and their friendship group, or the control is gone. As they're growing up and becoming more independent as young people, they're not having the freedom that they want. And then finally, what do they really, in terms of added value, get out of sport, and how relevant does this become for them? So for a small percentage of young people, the added value for them is because they want to go on and they want to achieve at the very highest level. But for the majority of the young people, what is the relevance of sport as they grow up in their life? Is it that it's still about socialization with my friends? Is it because I'm learning really important, valuable skills that will help me get a job one day? Or is it because I understand, someone has helped me understand, that if I don't keep physically active for the rest of my life, I leave myself open to a whole range of both physical and mental illnesses and diseases, which we're seeing, again, across the globe, increasing in their prevalence, whether it's dementia, whether it's cardiac issues, etc. So your moral purpose needs, if you're working with young people, to be anchored to one of these three things. Stage 2 of my Virtuous Circle is understanding young people. And the pictures there are to illustrate to you that every generation is different. So just put your hand up in the room if there's anyone who was born in this room since 1995. Couple. God, I bet you feel really young, and I bet you feel really old. You lot. If you're born since 1995, according to the research, you sit within what's known as Generation Z. So you are the most likely people to understand children and young people at the moment, because you're in their generation. You've grown up with the same social, economic, environmental conditions that they have. But for those of you that didn't put your hand up, you probably don't understand this generation. Things are changing, as we know, increasingly quickly. Let me tell you a few things about Generation Z. They're sometimes known as the I generation, for obvious reasons. They're also known as Generation Now. Generation Now. Partly because they are the I generation. They've been used to being able to find out, access, and do anything in an instant. I can remember going to a library and having to look up the classification of a book, and then look on a shelf, and then filter through it and find the chapter. Not necessary anymore. That has an impact, doesn't it, on young people? Generation Now means that they have less natural tendency towards persistence. They're less resilient. They're more likely to lose their attention focus quickly because they're so used to having that. They also are completely hooked on constant feedback. Any of you have children or are around children, you'll see them playing games on their handheld devices. Those games attract and hold young people to them because of the constant feedback all the time. Young people are hungry for feedback if they're in this Generation Z that we're dealing with today. They're also called the silent generation. It's because they spend so much time looking at their gadgets and communicating with each other through the airwaves, through social media and technology. So have we really thought about these sorts of things? If we're a young person-centered or an athlete-centered coach, how young people are different today because of the generation within which they're living. This generation are also known to be the most world-aware generation. They have grown up with the threat of terrorism. Ever since 9/11, that threat has been around. And do you know what? Because they're the most world-aware, they're the generation of young people that believe they can make a difference. They're incredibly socially responsible. They feel that they are going to be the solution to the world we find ourselves in today. So all of these things will affect the young people in your coaching groups. They will want to have decision-making capability, but they'll also want constant feedback. They'll want lots of things to change to capture their imagination and keep their attention, but at the same time, we have to underpin that and build some resilience and perseverance in them, because if we don't do that, remember what I said, we reap what we sow. They won't stick with this thing. And on the right-hand side of the slide is a piece of research that the Youth Sport Trust commissioned just earlier this year to give us a bit more of a sense of where we're going with young people. So Generation Z, you can look it up and Google it and find out more about them. The next generation coming at you are going to be called Generation Alpha. And that generation are dealing with some of these trends as they are likely to progress and unfold. And I won't go into all the things on the slide here, but we need to understand the generation we're working with. We need to understand through their life course where things are heading, whether that is the world slowing down, young people becoming increasingly inactive and less fit, therefore their capacity may be more limited. Whether it's the fact that we are in a world where urbanization is constantly increasing, and the communities in which young people grow up in are very, very different to the ones many of us grew up in. And in particular in society, we're living in a world where migration is the norm, and traditional cultures are threatened, potentially, if you see it that way, by the dilution of other cultures mixing into different communities as people migrate around the world, with sometimes under pressure and sometimes just because of the increased ease of movement. So we know you're an incredibly proud sporting nation, and we know that it runs deep in your culture. But are you as coaches aware of how that's changing, and how that means the coaching groups that you're working with, the ethnic diversity in those groups, are likely to bring a whole range of different attitudes and perceptions and ambitions around sport that need to be taken into account. So coming back to what Sue was saying, if we're moving to stage 3 of the model, kind of know what our moral purpose needs to be. We've got a sense now that we need to understand young people better. But even looking at all those trends, we'll never really understand the young person in front of us. And Sue is encouraging us to think about how much we question and the questions we ask. And I'm just going to pick up 2 points from this slide that have been revelations for us working in school sport, actually, in youth sport in the UK. Those of you working with young people with disabilities and special educational needs, the most important question you can rehearse and learn is, what do I need to do in order to help you to do this? Quite often, disability and young people with disabilities face huge barriers in sport, and the barriers are often created by us, the coaches and the deliverers, either because we don't understand or we're not comfortable with differentiation to be more inclusive in our provision, or, and I know that I was guilty of this when I was teaching, you try and second guess. You've been trained, you've been on the inclusion course, you've understood things, and you try and second guess now because you know how to differentiate for someone with a sensory impairment or a physical impairment. The most powerful thing we can do is simply ask the athlete, what do I need to do to help you to do this? They all know the answers. I remember us running a talent camp for school-age elite athletes, school-age talented athletes, as part of one of the programs we run. And in the morning, we were doing some mixed circuits. We brought a range of sports together, and one of the things we were encouraging the athletes to do is understand preparation in different sports. And there were Olympic and Paralympic sports in the program, and each of the coaches from the different sports was running a station, and there was a coach. I won't say which sport they were from because that would be unfair, but there was a coach who was running a session in the circuit which was all about upper body strength. And the exercise was a press-up. That's what the young people had to do. And as I wandered around, this coach was explaining to the group of athletes, okay, this station's about press-ups, and what this will do is build this muscle and strengthen your core, Let's have a look at an example. And he looked across, and there was a girl in a wheelchair. And you saw the horror on his face. Oh, I haven't thought about this. I hadn't thought about how I'm going to adapt this. But he had the presence of mind to say, what do I need to do to be able to make you do this? And all the girl did, still strapped into a chair, flipped a chair forward, and did a press-up in her chair. And you could see the relief on his face, thank goodness I've got that, and all the athletes followed suit. So that's such an important question. And then the second thing I just want to flag on here, again, I suspect this is commonplace in your culture. That image is supposed to represent a father with a child, and sometimes when we ask children questions about their ambitions, their aspirations, what do they want to do they want to play this season or not, we get the answer that they've learned and inherited from their parents. And we've got to be better than anybody at using skillful questioning to get underneath that and understand whether the motives are those of the child themselves or whether they're the motives of the parent. So it's not too big a leap to stage 4 of my model, which is once we've given young people a voice and encouraged them to have a voice, let's empower them. Let's give them the lead. And remember, I'm talking about children's coaching, participation coaching. I'm not talking about talent, so we'll come on to that in a minute. And we're finding that the most successful strategy for engaging the less engaged young people is to look at them as the solution to the problem, not the problem itself. So too often we've looked at young people who seem to be disengaged, seem to be enjoying sport, they're least active, and how do we get them active? Well, we're thinking, how do we unpick this problem child or these problem children? And actually, they're the solution, not the problem. We need to give them a voice, ask them. We then need to empower them. And we've had a really successful journey around girls and women's participation, young women's participation, where, again, I'm sure very similar to you, drop-off rates as children get older increase, but the gap between girls' and boys' participation is significant and grows significantly as young people get older. And what we found is usually with girls, the peer group is the big influential factor. And sitting in the middle of the peer group will be a ringleader, a young woman who, for whatever reason, is the role model for the others. And what she does, the others follow, and has a hugely influential effect on them and their engagement in sport. So normally we might think, oh, problem, we want to keep that girl away from the rest of the group because she's likely to influence them negatively. What we need to do is we need to get at her, give her a voice, empower her, and enable her to lead and market this thing that we feel so passionately about, but we don't know how to market to her because she's nothing like us. Let's get someone like her that can engage. And then the final stage of the virtuous circle. If giving a voice to empowerment is one small step, then the final step we can take, if we feel confident enough to release control, as Sue said, is to encourage young people themselves to be the coaches. Whether that's coaches of themselves or coaches of others, it doesn't really matter, but we get them to the point where they can make their own decisions, they have an opinion, they've been developed so that they have not only a voice and a choice, but they have an opinion in things, and they can coach. And there are some really good reasons to do this, not least capacity. You know when I asked you about who was born since 1995? The bad news is you're an aging population, and what we need, again, across the world, is more people ready to take up the baton. We need a new generation of young coaches to come through. You're their role models, so don't forget that. What we reap is what we sow. The role modeling that you do for the coaches of tomorrow will be what we get tomorrow. But importantly, you can help them by mentoring them. And seeing that as a fundamental responsibility of the coach is to mentor the coaches of tomorrow. So I hope that gives you a sense of the virtuous circle, with young people now in the lead and being the coaches, being from that generation, understanding the context and the world within which their peers are living. They will be even more effective than us at engaging the next generation. So we're going to pause again, give you some time to just reflect on all of that. What might be useful this time? Sue asked you to think about last time what was the greatest challenge for you or barrier to athlete-centered coaching. Could I just ask you now to do the flip side of that? Share with the people around you if there's anything you do on that cycle that you do really, really well and that you think might be of use, might be of help to somebody else if they're wrestling with some of the challenges I've presented.
Thank you, Ali, for that. I'm going to just spend the last 10 minutes or so talking about talented and elite athletes and perhaps reflecting with you what changes. We adopt this, we almost can see with children, this is, as Ali said, a way of keeping children more engaged, sustaining their engagement and growing them. But as we get to that talent and elite end, can we still retain this athlete-centered approach? Or does it become too pressurized? So I'm going to ask some questions. So that's you've all seen that. It's that long-term athlete development thing on the right as you're looking at it. But let's just think for a minute about this person we call the athlete. When they're children, they have so many other things going on in their life. They're busy little people. As they begin to be more talented, we start to demand more and more time. You know, you've got to be at the gym every morning or the pool every morning. You've got to come back at weekends. Now you can't go to those parties. And now you can't socialize with your friends. So some of those friendship groups start to break for them as they begin to move that talent pathway. And as an athlete-centered coach, you have to be sensitive to that. Of course, it's about choice. It's the athlete's choice. They want to go on that special journey to the top of Everest. Of course they do. That's their dream. And there are choices to be made, and they're not all comfortable choices. But what's your responsibility there to balance that life that they need outside sport and the sport life that they have? Really interestingly, we did a survey with our elite athletes running into Beijing. And one of the strong messages we got back was, give us something to do other than train. We're bored with this. So they were training like mad, and then of course we make them rest, and then we train them again, and we make them rest. God, how tedious is that? Okay, so what do we need to do? So we created a whole range of programs to engage them, to think about life beyond being an athlete. Really, really important we get that balance right, even with those people who are on that very myopic, focused, high-performance journey. And as the talent emerges, there was a word Ali used, really, really important, choice. Make sure that it is the athlete's choice and not their parents' choice, not someone else's choice that is demanding of them that they find that pathway to excellence. So as an athlete-centered coach, that balance changes, but we constantly have to be making sure it's not just the performance we're focused on. We're focused on much more than that. So what do we know about the coach-athlete relationship through this talent pathway into elite? And what are the challenges for us? So if the first one, based on everything we've said to you, is people want to belong. They want to have a sense of accomplishment, they want to feel valued, they want to belong. So what happens when you have to pick the team and leave people out? What happens when you go down to a squad and some people who've worked really hard aren't in there? What are you doing for them? And does it matter? Well, yes, it does. Because surprise, surprise, they may be tomorrow's coaches. They may be tomorrow's administrators. They may indeed be somebody who plays that sport for the rest of their lives. So you can't say it doesn't matter. It does matter. But it's a real pressure for you. How do you deal with that kind of selection when you're trying to give everybody the impression they belong and they're valued, but you're not in the team? Okay? You belong and you're valued, but I've dropped you from the squad. That's a pretty hard message. So it's about really being sensitive with the way you deliver that, being very transparent, open, consistent, letting them know on what basis are you picking people. You know, not everybody can get in the squad, but if I understand why I'm not in, and I've known well ahead of time, this is how you're going to decide, then I can live with that, even though that's painful. But if it looks like a mystery, and I feel I was better than him anyway, or better than her, then I'm going to feel a great sense of injustice. So as you develop talent, keep thinking about how you make sure your kids feel you're taking really good care of them and you're developing and showing them what fairness in life is like. Fairness doesn't mean everybody gets in the team. Fairness means I understand what I have to do to be in the team. And at UK Sport, we adopted the same approach to funding. You know, when I first went to UK Sport, what funding you got was a complete mystery. You guessed, we all had a guess, and somebody got some money. That's not how it can be. We created a very open and transparent system. It meant some sports did not get money, but that wasn't, they understood the rules of the game. The game has to be clear and transparent for everybody to understand. The second thing is you go through that talent to that elite end. You know, we talk about goal setting. It's a standard practice for those in talent and those in the elite end. You know, if it's the elite end, we might be setting 8-year visions now with our athletes. You know, not this Olympics, but that Olympics. Well, that's the goal. And how are we going to stage that? How are we going to travel that journey? There's lots of science in that and all sorts of other things. But the athlete has to be a really fundamental part of that goal setting. Understanding what it's going to take, what amount of training. The analogy we use sometimes is you've arrived at base camp on Everest, and now you're going to go to the mountain. And one of the hardest things to understand as an athlete, as it is on Everest, you don't set off from base camp and just keep going and walk to the top of Everest. It doesn't work like that. You go to camp 1, you may come back down. You go back to camp 1, you may come down again. Eventually you'll go to camp 2, but you might come back to camp 1. Athletes need to understand the journey doesn't start here and you just keep walking up a hill. Okay? It has setbacks, massive setbacks. How do you prepare them for those setbacks? That injury, blast, just before I was going to compete, it was going to be the best ever, I pull a muscle. How do we prepare them for that? And it comes back to Ali's resilience. How are we helping athletes cope with that, manage it, and do it effectively? And finally, this is really, really important. You are a team, and there has to be joint accountability. Joint accountability and self-awareness. So let's just take a really simple, practical example. Let's take a sport like, I think it was gymnastics, wasn't it? I think you were from, did I hear you say at the beginning? The marking for gymnastics has always been a mystery to me. And I think sometimes for the gymnastics judges as well. But anyway, but it's a very challenging thing to look at a movement and it's got more and more and more sophisticated. But what happens when you lose? Do you get in a corner with your athlete and say, that judge was useless? That official made a wrong call. Blimey, if that had happened, diddly. Do you know what you're doing? You're teaching them that there's only one way to solve losing. Make an excuse. We don't want athletes to have excuses. We want them to face up to the reality today, I wasn't good enough. Because there may have been a bad call, but there were at least 60 other minutes where you could have won the game. There may have been a difference in the points, but next time you're going to be so clear ahead, nobody can do anything but give you first place. So when you debrief with your athletes, share responsibility with them for what you're trying to do with them. You're trying to make them feel accountable for their own behaviors. Don't defer that away and find an excuse. Sometimes because you want the excuse, not because the athlete needs the excuse. Together, you have to realize honesty, facing up to things, and the learnings, just as you are doing, learning sometimes from not being successful, I won't call it failure, but not being successful, those learnings are probably the best learnings of all. When I was a performer, I didn't really learn from the matches we won. But by Jove, I learned when we played New Zealand. Because we got hammered, okay? And I learned so much about where we weren't good. But when I won, I just won. I didn't really learn from that. So, shared responsibility. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go back one. That bottom line, Ali used it as well. We created, in our sports, both in talent and the elite end, this view that athletes were expected to have an opinion. Expected to have an opinion. And I don't mean by that they were opinionated. I mean they were expected to have an opinion about their training, about their competition. Do you expect your athletes to have an opinion? And how do you seek those opinions from them and develop them? And finally, before I just lock into a little bit of closure, when we start to get our athletes on that talented and elite pathway, it's really important that we don't just unlock your creativity, but we unlock theirs. And there are certain fundamental things they need to understand. You can call it creativity. Some people call it flair. That move that you've never coached them, and somehow they do it. Or that nuance of interpretation that they do, and you go, where did that come from? It comes from within them. I'm a great believer within all of us, every single person in this room, there's innovation and creativity. I believe that. Whether you're using it is another matter. Or are you always doing what you've always done? Are you always following what you've always followed? Or are you standing back occasionally and saying, is there another way to do that? A better way to do that? The obvious one is the old Fosbury flop, isn't it? The athlete, Dick Fosbury. Dick Fosbury was a straddle jumper, where you do that. And he just wasn't tall enough. He was a brilliant straddle jumper. He was never going to be the world number one. And he wanted to be the world number one. And he and his coach had the dream. And they went away and they said, well, let's look at the rule book. What does the rule book say? The rule book says you take off on one leg. Huh. Well, how about he was a biomechanist. How about centrifugal force? You know, if I run around a curve, take off one leg, will it shoot me higher? He started doing this, I have to tell you, landing in sand, which was not good. But anyway, nearly broke his blinking neck. But the reality was innovation. He became the world's number one. Everybody now does the Fosbury flop. I wonder if there's an athlete out there who's going to find a different way to get over that bar, legally. So don't think that your athletes can't find different new solutions. And you certainly can. And if there was one other aspect, if we really worked on athlete-centered coaching, one other aspect we worked on going towards London and the Olympics was innovation. Let's stop doing what we've always done and let's try and be creative. Let's find new solutions. Really, really important. But you can't find solutions unless you know some of this. And you're encouraged to question. You know the rules of the game. You know, we watch sometimes athletes make the most fundamental errors at the highest level. And when you talk to them afterwards, they didn't understand the nuance of the rule that they were breaking as they did what they did. So how do you unlock creativity in you, and how do you unlock creativity in your athlete? And finally, I'm just going to cover off 4 very simple slides, which hopefully capture a lot of what we've said. When I think you become an elite coach, of course, you're good at technical, tactical, strategic. Of course, you absolutely know how to pull all that sports science and manage all those additional people that start to appear on the scene, the higher up that pathway you go. You're definitely good at communication, organization, planning, pedagogy, and you have a real flair for what you're trying to do. But there's an additional thing when you get to the top of coaching. You're no longer just a coach, you're a leader. And if you want to be a leader that really can produce and enable your athletes to produce the best performance of their lives, I believe you have to be what's known as an invitational leader. I don't know all the answers, but together we might find them. What do you think about that? So here's just 4 little definitions. That happens to be Dave Brailsford of British Cycling. Absolutely brilliant at selling to the sport a compelling vision for what is possible. Can you do that? Can you lift your head? And can you sell a compelling vision for why you're doing what you're doing? That moral purpose again. I think you might recognize this lady. I think she's on later. Your new netball coach. Do you welcome external and internal challenge? And do you have the courage to ask for help? Believe me, it takes more courage to ask for help than to try and battle through on your own and think you're being terribly brave and strong. Have the courage to ask for help. You met this guy yesterday, I think. An exceptional person. I'm sure you heard him. And what's exceptional about him? 2 big words, I think. Trust. Do your athletes trust you? Do they believe that you're in this together? You're not going to say, it was your fault, you got it wrong, you didn't do it well. But actually, together, we got it wrong. We can do better. And that absolutely collective responsibility. I hope you found that interesting. I hope maybe we've given you a little bit of food for thought. And I'll say again, and the reason I've used this picture, that happens to be Jess Ennis-Hill, who's the world heptathlon champion, and that's her coach, Tony. And the reason I've put them up there, Tony Minicello and Jess, is that we've talked about a pathway, and sometimes different coaches work at different points on that pathway. Tony's been coaching Jess since she was 10. And he can describe brilliantly how the athlete-centered approach, which he's had from her being 10, she's, I don't know if you've ever seen Jess Ennis, she's the most unlikely-looking heptathlete you've ever seen. She's far too small, far too tiny, really great hurdler. Nobody thought she would ever make it, except Tony. And Jess, of course. And together, they've travelled that journey. So whether you travel the journey with the athlete, whether you play your part in that athlete's journey, remember what we started with. If you're going to be athlete-centred, that journey must belong to them and not to you. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.